Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. You know what time it is. It's a Monday, so it's time for another iteration of Metagame Monday. In the past week, Legacy faced a little bit of tournament issues with, so I guess some technical issues with Magic Online, so a couple of challenges did get cancelled. I've chosen to compensate for that fact by including the top 16 of the 3 challenges that did conclude. So hopefully that should be useful as well. To set the table, I just wanted to share the general numbers for Legacy right now. We have, let me check my notes here, we have Red Prison at about 15%. Same with Delver variants combined. We have Reanimator all the way up 12%. And we have Oops All Spells at 7, Breakfast 6, Sneak Attack and Eldrazi both at 4. So the reason why I want to mention that is because that kind of sets the table for what these players that I'm going to talk about next, who manages to do well in this environment, what did they need to think about while choosing their deck, tweaking their sideboard, fixing their flex slots, etc. So those numbers, I will also just mention those numbers are also taken from leaks. We are also including random locals that get uploaded where somebody went 1 in 3 and they just decided it would be cool to have their deck list on the internet. So take that with a grain of salt. Let me put it that way. So let's get into these 3 legacy challenges. And let's just start with the elephant in the room. Delver Secrets reigns supreme. It put 13 copies in these 48 decks. Let's see. 16 plus 16 plus 16. Yes. 13 out of those 48 decks were Delver variants, primarily Temur variants. So what does that version do better than the others right now? So first of all, you have the Questing Druid. Not only does that help you build your own card advantage, it also helps you just have another creature to actually finish out the game. I found that some versions can be a little bit creature light, so that's a big help. Also, it has access to the basic island, which will help you against Blood Moon, Wasteland locks, whatever the case may be. One weakness of that deck is it has kind of bad Chalice of the Void removal. Maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But yeah, Delver reigns supreme, and I'm going to get back to the biggest reason why. Up next, we have Reanimator. I believe it was all the way up to 9 copies across these 3 top 16s, and that is a lot. Primarily, it's the Dimir version. We did see one version be the fast Reanimator, the Faithless Looting type deck, and then we had one version be Reanimator with a transformational Doomsday sideboard. So why is Reanimator winning right now? I thought getting Grief banned, getting Psychic Frog banned would be, enough. But yeah, this is a very, very cool example of, in Magic, nothing exists in a vacuum. It always exists in a context. And the context for Reanimator is that everybody else is trying to do their own thing, and then it turns out, turn 2 Atraxa with a Force of Will or Thoughtseize or Daze or whatever, that will trump most of what's going on. So until people start respecting this deck to a degree where, we're talking like back in the Grief era, the Psychic Frog era, this deck is going to keep winning. So very, very excited to see that deck keep surging, because the reason why I'm excited is mainly because I didn't see this coming at all. I thought this deck would be a niche deck, some strategy that you can bring out once in a while when the graveyard hate is kind of low, and then maybe top 8 some tournaments. But yeah, I was very wrong about that one, and I find that very, very fascinating. That just proves that Magic is the greatest game, right? So up next, we have Oops All Spells. It keeps impressing, and this is kind of weird because Reanimator getting so many copies in winning positions in these tournaments should basically mean that Oops All Spells will catch all the splash damage. But it seems to me, looking from the outside, that people don't have the expertise to play against this deck. A lot of people will have Graveyard Hate available and still lose to this deck. Maybe I should do a video on that in the future. This deck is capitalizing on putting a lot of pressure on the opponent's starting hands. I also think the lower number of Force Negations certainly does help this deck a lot. Just a lower number of Force Negations in the metagame in general. Simply too many hands, you have to hope they don't have the turn 1 kill, right? So yeah, Oops All Spells, force to be reckoned with. I believe it put 4 copies in these 3 top 16s. Up next, we have Blood Moon out of Mono Red Prison. Blood Moon Out of Mono Red Prison is a deck that, as I alluded to in the beginning, sees a ton of play, but only 3 copies in these top 16s, and that says something, right? So Delver and Blood Moon decks saw the equal amount of play, but Delver converted a lot better, like 4 times better. So that certainly does tell us that Blood Moon has some problems. You know, the die roll, hit or miss nature of Blood Moon. I will say a big draw to this deck right now is the fact that it plays Chalice of the Void. Chalice of the Void is amazing if your opponent is trying to cast Delver, cast Lightning Bolt, cast Reanimate, cast Dark Ritual. So I'm big on Mono Red Prison, and I think it will do a little bit better next week. Another deck that put up 3 copies in the top 8 is Self-Led Breakfast. So we talked a little bit about Nadu being absent last week, and Nadu is back, although at a very, modest rate. It looks like the combination of being able to kill turn 2, being hard to play against, having a lot of play to it, a lot of plan B, Saga, Nadu, stuff like that, makes Self-Led Breakfast the Nadu deck of choice right now, and I definitely like that. I will say it's kind of interesting that this deck also tries to win out of the graveyard when, so does Oopsal Spells, so does Reanimator, so there's definitely some stuff to... you can connect the dots here and see where this is going, I guess. Up next, we actually do see Eldrazi this week, but only because I included the top 16s. We have a couple of Eldrazi decks. So that deck is kind of back. We do play main deck Kozilek's Command. That is cool against graveyard decks. We do play Chalice of the Void. That is good against low curve tempo decks. We have a good mana base. That is good to play around days and stuff like that. So I like Eldrazi. The biggest problem for Eldrazi is when it has to cover many different combo decks. Also want to mention the Dreadnought deck. Phyrexian Dreadnought is a deck that I have worked a bit on lately. I really like the Jeskai version that I top 8'd with in one of these challenges. Somebody did copy the Dreadnought deck and won a challenge, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, Dreadnought is a deck that you really want your Stifle effects to be good against the metagame. You want Consign to be live. You want to catch people off guard with Stifle. You want to kill some Saga tokens with Dress Down. You don't necessarily want to get your Curie or Oculus pyroblasted. So there's a little bit of a metagame things going on. I also love that we have 3 copies of Prismatic Ending, which is just good chalice removal instead of playing bad chalice removal. And then we have Painter back in the mix here. I would really like to... I think I talked about it last time that I foresaw Painter making a comeback. I wouldn't say that that came to fruition or anything, but we do have 2 copies in these top 16s. Painter is a cool deck that really likes the fact that people basically stop playing Null Rod. It's also a deck that enjoys playing against a lot of blue decks with having access to Pyroblast. And yeah, just overall a cool deck for the experts mainly. It's a hard deck to just go and pick up. So yeah, these were all the decks that put multiple copies in the top 8. And yeah, it's just very interesting to see Delver of Secrets back. So if I'm going to say anything general, make sure you don't lose to Delver. Make sure you have the graveyard covered. Like, I know it's simple, but that's kind of my main takeaways here. Up next, we have a column with a swath of one-of decks. We have Sneak and Show. Sneak and Show is a deck that can take advantage when people are playing non-blue decks, but it's also a deck that will suffer if the opponent's sideboards are filled with splash damage like Pyroblast, Hydroblast, Needles, stuff like that. So it's a metagame deck for now, but could definitely see it do better in the future. And we have a single copy of Nadu Elves. Nadu Elves is a version that some very high-profile players chose for the Legacy Showcase qualifier, or the Showcase Challenge, rather. But this deck does not play Force of Will. If you lose turn 1 to Oopsal Spells, or you get a track set or whatever, this deck is not competitive. This deck kind of needs to prey on, a bit more of a slower deck where the uncounter ability here comes into play from the Shepherd, stuff like that. So we also had a 1 copy of Esper Vial. Esper Vial is a great deck if you expect to play against a lot of Delvers. I will say you put on a lot of pressure to handle the graveyard out of your opening hand. So that's the biggest problem with a deck like Vial. You definitely grind with the best of them, but surviving against a swath of combo could be difficult. Then we have a single copy of Dredge that made it. Very surprised about that. As I alluded to before, these decks usually do well when the graveyard is not accounted for in the metagame all that much. But yeah, kudos to that player. One copy of Mystic Forge also made it. This deck is not, anything special right now, but it can still win games, right? If you don't face your null rods, if you, get to play your defense grid instead of your bauble and kind of get the same effect. And, this can win games, but, between Wasteland, Blood Moon, Forces, Consigns, I don't foresee a big future for this deck unless something drastically changes. Then I've chosen a Narset here to represent Jeskai Control. Control is having a hard time. That's not a secret to anyone. Again, if you have 20 different decks, how can you build your perfect controlling deck? It's really not possible. The thing that's about Delver is it's kind of doing everything, because you're playing the universal stuff like Wasteland, Daze, Force, but you're also backing it up with pressure to not give your opponent infinite time to find whatever. So Delver is the control deck right now, and that's just how it is. We also saw a cool Jeskai Stoneforge Mystic deck. Kind of the same thing, right? If you get the wiggle room, it's a cool deck. Fun cards, nostalgia. But yeah, not the best position right now. Then there was one copy of what I call Dimir midrange. Basically, when there's no Delvers or Nethergoyf, I think it's just a midrange deck. Baleful Strix, Dimir. I like Dimir. I like the basics. I think the deck gives the opponent a little too much time to get out of the hole from, Daze, Wasteland, etc. But definitely another cool deck to play, and I really enjoy having access to the basic lands out of that deck. A single copy of a cool Besiege Dimir Charbelcher / Storm variant also made top 16. I'm not going to think too much into that. It's mainly just to highlight that you can succeed playing different interesting legacy decks. Last up, before we kind of go to the solutions, we have Crashing Footfalls. And actually, I want to talk a little bit about that. So Crashing Footfalls is a card that was almost unplayable when Vexing Bubble was legal, but now you kind of get to play a little bit, and I think this is pretty well positioned for a couple of reasons. So first of all, you have your Spirit Guides to pay for days. Second of all, you have access to Endurance, which is good against the Graveyard and is good against Delver. So I actually think this is reasonably well positioned. This deck has historically struggled with having a critical mass of, relevant cards. You have your 8 Cascade cards, but you kind of need some stuff on top of that, in my opinion, in order to keep enough hands. The deck has 8 forces. The deck can play an Inevitable Betrayal out of the sideboard. Very, very cool deck, exploiting casting spells for free. So I'm very interested in the Crashing Footfalls deck. I'll try and work on that in the not so distant future. Last point about Delver here is that Delver doesn't really care if your opponent's going to play Sneak Attack, Mystic Forge, or Besiege Dimir when it comes to Daze, Wastelanding, attacking, pointing lightning bolts at the opponent. So a lot of the reason why Delver is doing well, aside from, it being a strong deck that strong players like to play and strong players will win. So there's also a little bit of that, but Delver is just good if you don't really know what you're going to face. You don't care what 3-drop or 4-drop you're dazing. You just want to daze them, right? Yeah, with that being said, now I covered the 3 top 16s. I think we see some clear trends of Delver, stuff out of the graveyard, and a little bit of respect for Blood Moon. Now let's go check on my solutions here. So the first column is Nile Spellbomb and Endurance, and that is basically to say that main deck incidental graveyard hate is pretty potent right now. So whether you play Nile Spellbomb in the main deck because you have a Urza Saga, or you play it because you have another Nethergoyf and you want the artifact type, I think that's going to be useful. Same thing with Endurance here. If you play your Cradle Control deck, you want Endurances. If you play Rhinos, you want your Endurances. Maybe if you try your hand at a control deck, you want Endurances. So I think these are going to be key moving forward if you're going to attack the metagame from a deck that is not, one of the top 5 decks. So next up is Orcish Bowmasters. I include that card because if you have a black deck, blue-black, probably, right? Blue-black Tempo, blue-black Delver, blue-black midrange, whatever it is. Orcish Bowmasters is just such a house. It just, Flametongue Caboose, the 1-drop out of Delver, punishes cantrips, has to get dealt with. It's just a card advantage spell. So I really like a deck that can kind of free roll the Bowmasters in order to have a better Delver matchup. I mentioned this last time as well, but Grafdigger's Cage continues to be an awesome card. Oopsal spells cannot get around it. It's a 8-piece Reanimator has to kill. Is good against Nadu variants. Yeah. Grafdigger's Cage, very, very strong right now. And don't sleep on your Graveyard Hate, then you will lose a lot of matches to these decks. Last up here is kind of a, returning theme here of Hydroblast and Pyroblast. The whole point is that when you look over the metagame, Pyroblast can, it's good against Delver, against Murktide, against Force of Will decks, good against Illusionist. Then you go here, good against Kaito, good against Show and Tell, good against Forces. Pyroblast is just very, very all-round these days. It solves combo problems. It's good in any blue matchup. The reason why I mention Hydroblast here is, while we do have a lot of red decks on paper, they're not exactly crushing the challenges, but the crossover for Delver, where you can, get rid of Channelers, counter, keep forgetting that card, the Druid, Questing Druid, you can counter Sneak Attack in other matchups. Like, across the board, even with Painter, if Painter is on the rise, across the board, Hydroblast still gives you enough mileage that it's not just an anti-Blood Moon card, but that is, of course, the main use for it. But the justification is that Delver, and especially the Izzet or Teamer variant, is so big that we still want to play Pyroblast if possible. So that was kind of my rundown for the week. I'm pretty excited to see Legacy here being, it's kind of defined, but you still have room to do well if you like different strategies, right? You can't really complain about this. Delver, Graveyard, Blood Moon, not too much Ancient Tomb, a lot of interesting gameplays, cantrips back and forth, Force of Will matchups, and then of course we have different combo decks trying to pick their spot each week. So all in all, I love where Legacy is at, and yeah, let me know what you guys think about Legacy at the moment. Is Delver too dominant? Is Graveyard, too annoying? What are you working on to try and slice the metagame? I'm interested in all of that because I made this channel because I want to, I want to learn. I want to study the metagame. I want to do better tomorrow. And you can be a part of that. So this research I was going to do anyway. So I'm basically just letting you inside my my notebook here. So please let me inside yours if you have any. And yeah, as always, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time for more Metagame Monday.